Mersa Brega, the British forward position, has fallen, and the 2nd Armoured Division is in full retreat. In other words, the dam has broken, and the German Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, now stands ready to flood Benghazi, possibly even the whole of Cyrenaica. How will the water flow, and what, if anything, can Archie Wavell, British theater commander, do to hold back the German tide? I'm Indy Nidell, and welcome back to yet another exciting episode of this North Africa miniseries. Over the last few weeks, we've seen how Rommel and the Afrika Korps have grown from a desperate last-minute response to a very real and imminent threat to the Allied forces in North Africa. Last week, we left off just after the Battle of Mersa Brega, where Rommel, for the first time since his arrival not even 2 months ago, unleashed the entirety of his forces onto the British and Commonwealth troops. And on April 2nd, the German 5th Light Motorized Division and the Italian units under Rommel's command stand ready and await further orders. The planes of German 10th Flieger Corps observe the enemy withdrawal eastward along the Via Balbia, the Mediterranean coastal road, and across the Libyan desert. Once the Luftwaffe reports are confirmed, Rommel doesn't take long to make up his mind about what to do next. It was a chance I could not resist, and I gave orders for Aghdabia to be attacked and taken, in spite of the fact that our instructions were not to undertake any such operation. Aghdabia is the next British-held town east of Mersa Brega. By now, it's no secret that Rommel regards his orders more as recommendations than binding instructions, but this time he goes the extra mile. He consciously breaks orders personally given to him by Adolf Hitler less than 2 weeks ago. He divides his forces into 2 groups and orders one to advance north and the other south of the Via Balbia. South of the road, the 5th Panzer Regiment, the entirety of Rommel's German armor, leads the push. However, while the Allied retreat may be chaotic, they are not amateurs and are more than capable of laying a trap. At 5:30 p.m. April 2nd, the German tanks meet resistance from one squadron of the 5th Royal Tank Regiment. This squadron, short 4 of its 18 total tanks, and with no artillery or infantry support, is the rear guard protecting the entire retreating British division. So 14 tanks stand between survival and annihilation. They do have one advantage, though, as Rommel describes. In this action, the enemy used a very effective camouflage in the form of Arab tents, which enabled them to come into action unexpectedly. So while the British are thoroughly outgunned, they also at least have the element of surprise. And the British tanks emerging from the tents and opening fire do cause the Germans some damage. Soon 3 panzers lie destroyed in the desert. The southern German advance momentarily falters, and the British rearguard has time to retreat. But the Germans report 7 British tanks destroyed, though the British report only 5. This is a big chunk of the British armor, but the whole action is significantly more serious for the Germans than one might at first assume. The enemy failed to follow up, missing an opportunity to cripple in one blow almost the entire British medium tank force. This is true. Ground down more by the fine desert sand and a lack of parts and fuel than by German guns, in all of Cyrenaica, only 12 British medium tanks remain, together with 26 captured Italian M13s and 18 light tanks. By the end of the day, the tip of Rommel's forces, 3rd Recon, takes the port of Zuetina. By now, Wavell and British High Command have realized the seriousness of the situation. But it is too late. And I don't just mean in general. Wavell literally arrives too late when he reaches Regional Commander Philip Name's headquarters the afternoon of the 2nd. There he learns that the 2nd Armored Division is in the process of withdrawing to Skeladima via Antalat. Why is that an issue? Well, this hands the Via Balbia, the principal transport artery not only of Cyrenaica, but of all of Libya and North Africa, over to Rommel, and with it a direct route to Benghazi. Wavell immediately countermands the order given by Name to General Gambier Parry, the divisional commander, and says the coastal road must be held for as long as possible. But as I already said, it is too late. Worse, with this, his orders and counter-orders, which in some cases reached the troops not at all or only too late. Wavell contributed greatly to the confusion on the British side in the next hours and days. One specific example is his decision to summarily fire General Neame, though he wants to replace him with someone who has already proven his capabilities in desert warfare, none other than the victorious commander of the Western Desert Force, under whose command the British basically annihilated the entire Italian 10th Army and stood as close as ever to pushing the Axis out of the entire African continent, General Richard O'Connor. However, O'Connor will refuse the post, but will instead ask to be Neame's close advisor. So that's what will happen. Neame staying on with O'Connor by his side, making the situation even more confusing. As the 3rd of April dawns on North Africa, roughly 2 hours before O'Connor steps on the plane from Cairo at 7:45 a.m., we can already see the consequences. Gambier Parry reports scattered and disorganized tanks, and more of them are being abandoned because of breakdowns or because there is no gas for them. 20 of these abandoned tanks, some British captured Italian M1340s, are found by a German advance party, confirming Luftwaffe reports by driving all the way up the coast to El Magroun. This leaves the British with like 6 remaining M13s. Also, now that the road is open, the 9th Australian Infantry Division, dug in around Benghazi, is overextended and exposed. So it has orders to march east towards Tobruk, meaning the city and the port of Benghazi are ripe for the taking. And here is where Wavell makes another critical mistake. I will let O'Connor sum it up. The chief continued to hope that Rommel's ultimate objective was not further east than Benghazi, but I think the wish was father to the hope. Whatever hope lingers, it proves far removed from reality on the 3rd when Rommel makes a decision. The British apparently intended to avoid, in any circumstances, fighting a decisive action. So that afternoon, I decided to stay on the heels of the retreating enemy and make a bid to seize the whole of Cyrenaica at one stroke. Trading ground for time to protect their forces is indeed the British strategy here, as is letting go of Benghazi if necessary. That contingency, however, does not factor in a German push right up to the Egyptian border. That is precisely what Rommel has in mind now. How does he plan on getting the job done? Well, Rommel wants to send part of his forces through the southern desert. They are to march from Aghdabia over Ben Ganina and Tengender, reaching their destination at Tamimi. This is the noose Rommel sets for the British forces remaining in the land bulge extending into the Mediterranean. Once drawn tight, any British troops left within would be encircled and cut off from supplies. But that is not all. It is supposed to be a multi-pronged attack. So orders are given. Detachment Santa Maria, 13:45 hours, received verbal order by Lieutenant General Rommel to reconnoiter in the direction of Ben Ghania. And at 15:45 hours, Aufklärungsabteilung 3 becomes Korpstruppe, advances on Magrum, and reconnoiters towards Solich and Chemins. Santa Maria is part of the Ariete Division, the only Italian tank division Rommel has at his disposal, and Colonel Fabrice sits at its helm, while Aufklärungsabteilung 3, that is 3rd Recon, headed by Lieutenant Colonel von Weckmar, is supposed to drive up the coast towards Benghazi. Both Fabrice and von Weckmar leap into action. Rommel also specifies the rest of 5th Light Motorized Division is supposed to follow the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion forward along the Via Balbia towards Benghazi. However, there's a problem. While 5th Light might not be in as bad a state as the British 2nd Armoured Division, General Streich, divisional commander, complains about the condition of many of his vehicles and tanks, though Rommel doesn't stop his offensive and basically ignores his complaints. But Streich has another issue, one that cannot simply be ignored. At about 4 p.m., somewhere between Aghdabia and Zuetina, pushing 3rd Recon along, Streich once more contacts Rommel. He explains the division has only enough fuel for about 150 kilometers and will need 4 days to resupply. The Desert Fox is not impressed. This seemed to me to be utterly excessive, and I immediately gave orders for the division to unload all its vehicles and send them off at once to the divisional dump at Arco dei Fileni, whence they were to bring up sufficient supplies inside 24 hours. It meant the division being immobilized for 24 hours, but with the enemy withdrawing, this was a risk we could afford to take. After taking this calculated risk, Rommel moves on to other things. He is the type of commander who wants to be right at the front, so he sets out to reach von Weckmar and 3rd Recon to see personally how it's going on the road to Benghazi. When he arrives, von Weckmar is already by Magrun, uncovering a destroyed British supply dump, courtesy of the 23rd Australian Field Company, who withdrew from here the day before. This is part of the larger demolition program put in motion by name. In Benghazi, at supply dumps, and wherever they can, British troops were and are busy scorching the earth for Rommel, with minefields strewn about as housewarming presents. Von Weckmar has some great news for the Desert Fox. He met an Italian priest who came from Benghazi to report that the city was free of enemies. So von Weckmar asks that he and 3rd Recon be sent to Benghazi immediately, a request Rommel gladly approves. Benghazi, the capital of Cyrenaica and the second largest city in Libya, is about to fall into German hands without a fight. Meanwhile, on the way back to his headquarters, Rommel and his companions encounter a lone German vehicle. At first, Rommel thinks this might be part of 3rd Recon, having either lost its way or simply broken down. But that is not the case. As the general comes closer, he notices that something is off about the people inside. The vehicle was apparently manned by British officers. We did not bother to stop, assuming that they would be picked up by 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, which is what happened. The Tommies had ambushed a German driver northwest of Agadabia in the hope of making their way through to their own troops in Cyrenaica. After their gallant attempt, one could almost have wished them success. However, they were unlucky. Those unlucky Tommies will be added to the roughly 800 British Army POWs already in Axis hands here by this point. Once Rommel returns to headquarters, there is an unpleasant surprise waiting for him in the form of a positively fuming Italian 60-something, Rommel's superior, General Italo Garibaldi. Rommel already knows Garibaldi isn't exactly happy with what he's done, since on the 2nd he received this dispatch from the man. By the news receipts, I can assume that you will continue to advance, and this is not what I ordered. Please await me before continuing the movement. A day later, the please has turned into stern demands as Garibaldi arrives at Rommel's headquarters, which are already in the newly captured Agadabia. Rommel recounts. Garibaldi berated me violently. He added that the supply situation was far too insecure. He wanted me to discontinue all action and undertake no further moves without his express authority. I was not going to stand for it, and said that I intended to go on doing what I felt I had to in whatever situation might arise. This brought the argument to a climax. One could argue that, given Rommel has stranded almost an entire division because of a lack of fuel, and General Streich explicitly complained about the state of his vehicles, Garibaldi has a point, at least about logistics. But right then, at the crucial moment, comes Deus ex machina, in Rommel's own words. A radio message reaches Afrika Korps headquarters straight from Berlin. For Rommel, this could spell disaster or hand him quasi-unlimited authority. What does the OKW, Wehrmacht High Command, have to say regarding his blatant breach of orders? Rommel relays that the message gives me complete freedom of action and settles the argument exactly as I wanted it. Something only further cemented the next day when Rommel receives congratulations from the Fuhrer himself. Or is this in fact the case? Barton Malm writes, there must be some doubt, however, whether in fact this was true, and whether the war diary records supporting the assertion are genuine. For a directive issued by the German High Command on this very day, over Field Marshal Keitel's signature, stated that Hitler had reached the following decisions on the 2nd of April. 1. For the time being, the main task of the German Afrika Korps is still to defend positions reached and to tie down as great a part as possible of the British forces in North Africa. They are not supposed to expand offensive operations until 15th Panzer Division arrives, and above all, avoid exposing the right flank, which would happen should they pivot north to Benghazi. 2. Even after the arrival of the 15th Panzer Division, an extensive operation with Tobruk as the objective cannot be undertaken for the time being. 3. Cooperation with Italy will remain limited for the time being to the subordination, if necessary, of an additional motorized division to the German Afrika Korps. 4. The German general at Comando Supremo is requested to obtain Italian high command agreement to these principles. Mon thinks it possible, indeed likely, that the message received by Rommel during the conference with Garibaldi was in fact that conveying these decisions, and he just Rommeled his way out of it. Whatever the case, in the very early morning hours of the 4th of April, von Weckmar and 3rd Recon have reached their destination. The DAK War Diary reads, Benghazi occupied 0300 hours. But we've seen that both Rommel and Wavell feel Benghazi has no strategic value, and Rommel now needs to make up his mind about how he wants to proceed. As he looks at the maps, Rommel notices something. The old Ottoman fort of Mechili, some 80 kilometers due south of Derna, lying at the crossroads of ancient caravan routes, is the gateway to pretty much every important location along the coast. From here, one can reach Agadarbiya, Benghazi, Derna, El Adam, Tobruk, and importantly, the goal of the German encirclement strike, Tamimi. While that's already plenty of reason to take it, there is more. Mechili also has a well, which will be critical for conducting further operations through the desert. And what the Germans don't know, but something the British are very much aware of, is that at that fort a sizable supply dump was created, enough to supply a whole armored division, some 10,000 men, for a whole month. So while Rommel thinks Mechili must be taken soon, the British know it must be held at all costs. Rommel realizes that 3rd Recon, now twiddling their thumbs in Benghazi, is perfectly poised to attack Mechili. To enable this, he sends over the Italian Brescia Division. So once the motorized Italian Infantry Division reaches Benghazi, a reinforced 3rd Recon will make its way towards Mechili. A tank company is also sent on its way. That's not all Rommel orders, though. He sends orders to the Ariete Division. Fabrice Column, the head of the force slicing through the desert in the south, is now to be followed by the bulk of the division. But that's still not all. General Graf von Schwerin is also to lead the reinforced 8th Machine Gun Battalion and the divisional command staff under General von Streich over Benganina and Tengender to Mechili and to the coast. As the Axis forces are about to begin their approach from several directions, British reinforcements are already at the destination. The 3rd Indian Motor Brigade, ordered forward from Brasse on the 3rd, now digs in. That same day, the 4th, further west, the retreating 3rd Armored Brigade, the whole armored contingent of the British 2nd Armored Division, the division is missing an armored brigade because it's away in Greece, is low on fuel and supplies, has lost roughly 1 tank to mechanical breakdown every 16 kilometers, but finally reaches Massus and finds disaster. What Brigadier Remington hoped to find was Forward Maintenance Center number 2, holding 20,000 tons of supplies, half of it gas. What he finds is indeed Forward Maintenance Center number 2. But instead of 20,000 tons of supplies, he encounters their charred remains. Who is to blame? Not who, but what? A faulty report of an advancing German column, which led to the local British commander destroying the supply dump. This significantly complicates Remington's task of getting to Mechili. It looks like he might have to take a detour. Instead of turning east at Charuba, he will have to continue pushing north towards Marawa, hope enough gasoline can be found there, then turn around and drive back to Charuba, and then turn towards Mechili. The British are not the only ones facing difficulties, though. The German supply and maintenance issue, already outlined by Streich a day ago, is also only getting worse by the kilometer, especially in the south, where the forces are not traveling on roads, but on sandy desert paths. Erwin Rommel can be described as charismatic, energetic, and as leading from the front. But he can also be characterized, at least at times, as headstrong and arrogant. Before the Germans begin their attack, Rommel receives a warning. I had been told by the Italian General Zambon that the track from Agadarbiya to Gioffel Matar was an absolute death trap, and he had done his best to dissuade me from sending troops through Cyrenaica over that route. However, I placed more faith in my own observation. The ground was quite good for driving, and caused us no particular difficulty. Yeah, well, Rommel should have listened, or at the very least been more careful, because, as the DAK War Diary notes, all detachments reported heavy losses of vehicles because of the completely trackless terrain. Further supply only possible by four-wheel drive trucks. Reports confirmed the quote of General Zambon, who had described the Trig El Abd as a suicide route. So, as two Axis forces push towards Mechili, and the bulk of the 5th Light Division sits waiting for its fuel, this could very well prove to be a problem for the Germans. From here, it will only get worse as the distance from supply dumps increases and the wear and tear mounts. Should the British manage to put up a sizable defense at Mechili, and the Germans are reduced not by enemy fire, but ground down by the relentless desert, this could spell disaster for Rommel personally even. Maybe, just maybe, the Desert Fox should sometimes take the advice of strangers, subordinates, and superiors. General Zambon, General Streich, and General Garibaldi have unequivocally warned him, yet Rommel pays no heed. He knows better. So, as we leave North Africa for the week, we do so with an imminent clash between Commonwealth and German troops on the horizon. Oh yes, in Mechili, sure, but that's not what I'm talking about. As the 4th of April draws to a close, at 6 p.m., 3rd Recon reaches El Regima Pass. What they don't know, but we'll soon find out, is that the Devil's Own, the 2nd Battalion of the 13th Australian Infantry, are waiting for them. To see whether 3rd Recon successfully breaks through the pass, whether Richard O'Connor can salvage the situation, whether Rommel can take Mechili, or whether the desert sucks all the momentum out of the German attack before it can be hammered down, well, that will all be revealed next week. Until then, while you think about all this, you should join the Time Ghost Army. It is the army that enables us to do, well, everything we do. If you want to shed light on the Second World War and beyond, become part of our mission at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. Dale Allen Platt is the Time Ghost Army member of the week for this channel, and these are the newest officers. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.